We are back on the record in State versus Sidney Powell. State's response.
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, ladies and gentlemen, it feels like when we did jury selection in this case, that was about 6 months ago. I appreciate you listening to all of the evidence. One of the things why I mentioned jury selection is there were some questions that I asked you during that process. And I always find it challenging when I'm talking to jurors in jury selection and trying to explain certain concepts that it's very difficult to do in a vacuum. And you heard a little bit about the facts of this case, but certainly not everything you've heard now. Now, one of the things that I asked each and every one of you, as difficult as it may be, could putting aside feelings of sympathy or empathy or emotion, are you able to do that? Now, when you're sitting in that jury selection room and you don't know anything about the case versus now I think you understand why I asked those questions. Because this is going to be incredibly difficult. To put aside those considerations and to follow the facts and the law. I can't imagine, it's difficult for anybody, right? Sitting through this case, you are all human beings, and I'm sure any human being who sees this case can't help but feel the strongest sympathy and empathy for this family. And as Attorney Malarczyk said in his opening statement, it's time to end this nightmare. Now, ladies and gentlemen, your sworn oath as jurors, this is why it's tough. It's not to end a nightmare. It's not to feel sympathy for this family, which you may do, and that's fine. But each and every one of you, as you go through this deliberative process, is going to have to ask yourselves, is my thinking based on my emotion about this case or the facts and the law? Is my thinking about how I feel about this case based on all of Ms. Powell's family support, or is it on the facts and the law? Each one of you is going to have to do that. And you are duty-bound to follow the facts and the law without sympathy or prejudice. And ladies and gentlemen, one of the reasons I say this is not because I just want to win a case or I'm looking for a conviction or a certain result, but putting that aside, that's the funny thing about the law. It's supposed to protect all of us equally. And the judge is going to read you these jury instructions in a minute. And there is no exception in the jury instructions for, well, if you feel sympathetic towards somebody, your verdict, that can influence your verdict. Or if you feel that Ms. Powell has this bunch of family support behind her, well, then I can make an exception. That is nowhere in these instructions. Now, I'm not asking you to be robots. You are human, and you're going to go through emotions in that jury room. But ultimately, at the end of the day, to use the psychological parlance, you can't let those considerations inform your verdict. Ladies and gentlemen, so let's talk about the experts. And I also asked you in the beginning of this case when we were doing jury selection, why don't we just pick our experts, have them testify, and call it a day? I hope now you at least understand why that is. Because so many of the facts of this case, in those 3 days that we presented our evidence, inform you of your decisions and deliberations you're going to have to make in this case. You can't just look at this case in a vacuum and say, well, the defense experts say this, and the prosecution expert says that, let's just pick who's right. Because ultimately, and this is the law, that whether somebody is insane at the time of the crime is a factual issue to be decided by the jury. That's why we don't just have experts and have a judge decide. It is up to you all to make that determination. And while we're talking about the experts, let's first talk about the state's expert, Dr. Obradovich. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you one of the reasons why the defense is attacking her so hard is because it's obvious. If it's not obvious to you by now, it should be. She is the only expert you heard from that actually looked at the evidence.
Objection.
I'm going to
Argument.
over. Pardon me?
I'm sorry, argument.
I agree. I'm going to overrule.
She's the only expert that looked at the evidence. And ladies and gentlemen, the defense is so desperate to make you believe or to convince you that all the tests that all their experts did, all those acronyms of all those tests are the conclusive answer to this case. That they did all these psychological testings. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you don't need Dr. Obradovich to tell you that a test you give somebody 2 or 3 years later is not going to give you the answer. You don't need a doctor to tell you that. Your common sense tells you that. And just because you're sitting in that jury box doesn't mean you put aside your common sense. Those tests, while they may measure what Sydney is going through at the time they are administered, and let me just talk about that for a second. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't doubt that Ms. Powell may have some major mental health issues going on in these last 3 years. That's why I asked Dr. Reardon that. Would losing your mother and your best friend, in and of itself, cause psychological issues? Of course. On top of that, that you did it, yes. On top of that, now you're facing murder charges. So I don't doubt that some of these doctors are giving all these tests to Ms. Powell, that they are finding, hey, she needs some help. But those tests do not tell you anything about her mental state at the time of the crime. No matter how desperately the defense wants you to believe that, it's just not the case. Attorney Malarsic said, is this her plan to lie to these doctors, to fake all these illnesses, the Meryl Streep and such as he's going on? Well, what does the evidence show? The evidence shows that 4 days after she's in the hospital after the murder, she says, I don't want to speak to any family, I just want to speak to my lawyer. So yes, I submit to you that during these 3.5 years, yes, it's part of the plan. This NGRI is part of her legal strategy. And Dr. Smart, Attorney Malarsic's like, well, Dr. Smartnick, did she just pull the wool over his eyes? This is why you need the details matter. Because Dr. Smartnick says, if you look at his report, I meet with her about every 3 months. And some of the other experts will say, I only met her via Zoom. Because remember, some of these evaluations took place during COVID. Now, that's not their fault. But to say, well, she pulled the wool over these experts' eyes, these experts didn't spend every single day with her or even meet with her every week. Please take that into consideration when you're making your determination. A few things on the facts. Mr. McAleese went over them in detail. But ladies and gentlemen, the state is not saying that this was some sort of elaborate, well-planned plan. it wasn't. As Dr. Obradovich said, Sydney just kind of planned step to step to step. She didn't know what she was going to do next, but I guarantee you she was doing everything she could to get to that March 4th spring break, because then she'd have a reason to be home for a week, and then the next step would be something else. But this wasn't an elaborate, well-planned plan. That's why it was done so sloppily. And there is no evidence that, Mr. Malarczyk wanted to use these 26 minutes because she knew the police were coming and she had 26 minutes. Think about why was Brenda in the bedroom? Something that we haven't really talked about. Why did this happen in her bedroom? If the defense would have you believe, actually as Sydney would have you believe, she and Brenda were having this heart-to-heart, and everything was going to be fine, and I'm going to call Mount Union. And even the message said, Sydney's sitting right next to her. Yet at the time of the murder, she is back in a bedroom. Is it possible that at some point, Brenda said, you know what, Sydney, enough of what you're saying. I need to go back in the bedroom. I need to talk to them alone, and then I'll come back out and talk to you. Because all the evidence points to is that this was a surprise attack. Sydney wasn't sitting on the bed next to Brenda when she was attacked. Because you have to think about what Gaffney and Frazier said they heard. But think about what they didn't hear. They didn't hear, Sydney, what are you doing? Sydney, put that down. Why do you have a frying pan in here? Not one word other than, thanks for calling me back, and thud. And the frying pan makes sense in terms of Sydney's lack of planning. Because it is a small house. Maybe when Brenda goes down the hallway into the bedroom, you stay here, I'm calling Mount Union. And she grabs the first thing she can find, the pan. But never forget, during your deliberations, at some point during this attack, Sydney stopped attacking with the pan, presumably went to the kitchen to get a knife, because that's where they are, unless, I don't think we heard any evidence that Brenda would keep a steak knife in her bedroom. She had to switch weapons and keep attacking her. And when you're figuring out whether the murder was purposeful or felony murder, like Mr. McAleese was saying, please think about those injuries. Because I could see the frying pan just in a rage or snapped or whatever it was, but that knife just in the neck multiple times, that's purposeful. That is trying to end someone. That the defense, I'm going to go back to this, that the defense keeps saying she had 26 minutes. She had 26 minutes. She had all this time. Why didn't she flee? That's assuming, because I said, why was Brenda back in her bedroom? If she said, Sydney, I need a minute, I'm talking to them. She's isolating herself in the bedroom because she wants privacy. They're not going to be on speakerphone. She's going to have the phone up to her ear, and then when the attack happens, the phone drops. So when Ms. Gaffney's saying, I'm calling the police, you have a phone that's probably not on speaker, that's on the floor. Do you really think she's going to hear that? I submit to you, at that time, Sydney had no idea the police were on their way. The evidence shows that the only time she knew the police were on their way was when her dad told her. And that's when she started scrambling. That's when she made these conscious decisions to lie about being her mom, to go outside, to actually think about, not just do I need to break this back window, I need to actually go outside, break it from the outside. You saw the splatter. Brenda's blood's already on her arm as she's breaking that window from the outside. She is thinking in the moment. And there's no other conclusion to reach other than that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very clear, and you'll have all the reports, and you've heard all the testimony, that much of what the defense experts and even the initial hospital evaluations base their evaluations and their opinions on are the word of Sidney Powell. And please, in your deliberations, remember that this is a woman who is able to lie by deliberate lie or a lie of omission to those closest to her for months. Over and over and over again. Is it really that much of a stretch to think she had the capacity to feign symptoms, exaggerate symptoms, or downright lie? Of course. The defense makes so much of the motive, and the state can't tell you why. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is why I asked it in all the way back in jury selection. Not every brutal crime that doesn't seem to make sense right away is insanity. That's why I asked in jury selection, so every time a shooter goes into an elementary school and shoots up a classroom full of kids, as god-awful as that is, must always be insane? Of course not. And I think we heard some testimony on that. I think even Dr. Reardon said that wasn't the case. But you have to ask yourselves, if Sidney was on the verge of this psychotic break, not in control of her actions, completely unaware of what she was doing, she had 45 minutes with Brenda. Why not kill her in those first 45 minutes? She only attacks her when she's on the phone with Mount Union, right when her secrets are about to be discovered. And I submit to you, that's why this happened. Wasn't some argument between the two of them. I don't think even in that moment she wanted her mother dead. She just wanted to prevent her secret from coming out, which she had tried for months. Think about the will it takes to keep this a secret for months. She had done that, and she's about to be discovered. Now, Attorney Larsick used the phrase rational a few times. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not rational to kill your mom to prevent from being found out. But it's not insane. It's not something you or I would do. And actually, I believe Dr. Swales or Timmy actually used the word irrational in their report. And that simply means not logical. But that is not legal insanity. She was trying to stop from being discovered at any cost. She panicked, she overreacted, and she took it too far, and she covered it up. That is what happened here. Please look through those reports. And I really want those expert reports. I want you to focus on how much time the defense experts actually chose to talk about Sidney's actions at the time of the crime. The getting on the phone, pretending she was Brenda, the breaking of the window, the making up of the story. It's almost zero. The only time Dr. Timmy mentions it is when he's criticizing Dr. Obradovich. But there's no section in any of the reports that say, all right, well, let's talk about her actions at the time. And I just want to, just as an aside, I think it's an incredibly unfair criticism to attack Dr. Obradovich over this being like the first time she's testified and attacking her credentials. First of all, what did I ask Dr. Reardon, who's been around forever, how many reports has he written? Well over 2,000. Sir, how many times have you actually testified in court? Oh, 50 to 100 in a 50-year career. That shows you that these cases like this just don't go to trial a whole lot. That doesn't mean somebody's not qualified to give an opinion. It's like asking a brain surgeon who's done 1,000 brain surgeries, but has never been sued and never come to court. Well, you've never testified about brain surgery, so I guess you're not qualified. And I guarantee you, Dr. Swales, Dr. Timmy, and Dr. Reardon all had a first time too. So to say it's because that first time she's testifying, that's incredibly unfair. And just please, again, ask yourselves, why don't they focus on the facts as they happen? Why didn't they want those phone records? That's objective fact. I mean, you could look at it yourself. You could look at Dr. Obradovich's report. I mean, she's reporting what she sees on the phone. This isn't some lost week where Sydney didn't know what she was doing. She's able to check into motels, and she's actually able to search how to convert coins to cash. That's a rational, goal-oriented decision-making. This isn't some lost week where she's in a psychotic break. All three experts and a number of professionals initially, you know what, and I don't fault those hospital doctors, by the way, because they're taking what's in front of them. If any one of us were to kill somebody without an explanation, go to the hospital and say, I'm feeling suicidal and I'm hearing voices, what do you think the hospital's going to do? They're going to do what they did here. But that's not NGRI. That's not insanity. Those experts and treating doctors, they believed Sydney. They took her at her word. They trusted her that she was telling the truth. The question is, do you? After all you've heard about her lying and how she's able to tell specific lies, even in the moment, to get out of a jam or to deflect. I think even her mom said it, texted her one time, well, why aren't you in class? Why aren't you in class? Well, the professor, they're on vacation. She comes up with like this elaborate lie. That is the person we're dealing with. That's what she's capable of. Please also think about what my colleague mentioned about the difference in our murder charges. One is purpose murder, and the other is felony murder. Okay? And to elaborate on that, as Mr. McAlee says, even if you don't intend for somebody to die, if you cause an injury or do an action deliberately that results in their death, you are responsible. So felony murder in Ohio, one example would be if I were to take a gun and I just wanted to shoot somebody in the leg to scare him or get him away from me, and that person ends up dying, I don't get off by saying, well, I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted to shoot him in the leg. Ohio law says even if you don't intend death, if you cause injuries that result in death, you're culpable. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the last thoughts I'll leave you with is the defense keeps saying, the state can't tell you why, the state can't prove this, the state can't prove this. Well, neither can the defense. And we need to go back to what your job is actually going to be here. And with that in mind, this is what we're looking at. Forgive the crudeness of my drawing. 50% is a preponderance of the evidence. That is the defense's burden, okay? So 50% in the middle here. But it is two-pronged, as even Dr. Timmy, and the judge will tell you, that's the law. Not only does the defense bear the burden of proving that Sydney had schizophrenia at the time, they also have to prove by a preponderance that it was that same schizophrenia that caused her to not know the wrongfulness of her actions. So there has to be essentially a cause here that connects these two. There needs to be a cause. And you know what has never, ever made sense in this case is that even if you believe every one of the delusions or hallucinations Sydney has claimed to have over the years, not one of them, not one, would lead to violence against another. Not one. She never had a hallucination that I was feeling like I wanted to hurt somebody. I was feeling angry with somebody else. I wanted to lash out. All of her thoughts, even confirmed by Dr. Reardon, say they're all self-derogatory. That would more likely result in a patient like this of self-harm than harming another. Because it's the hallucination and delusions that are the hallmark of schizophrenia. The hallmark. Those delusions have to lead somehow to murder. Ladies and gentlemen, even if you think by a preponderance of the evidence, by 51%, that the defense somehow got over that hump, that's only half the analysis. They need to get you to that this caused wrongfulness, that somehow it led to murder. They haven't even come close. How does shooting spider webs out of your hands like Spider-Man, or seeing water or fire come out of your hands, or any other of the hallucinations or the voices that say, I suck, I'm a loser, I'm no good, how do those lead to murder? They don't. They cannot get here. It is, remember, their burden. This is the law. This is your job. You have to put your sympathy, your emotion aside, and this is what you're focusing on. Ladies and gentlemen, there have been many, many times in this case that I wish that when police arrived, Sydney was fetal next to her mother. I wish that there were prior reports indicating something was going on with her mentally. I wish that Lauren Curry...
It is our personal opinion, Mayor.
I'm going to allow it.
I wish the evidence showed something like that, because as I said in the beginning, even in jury selection, that you have to follow the evidence. And what you didn't hear in any of the hallucinations or delusions Sydney reports is a reason to kill her mother. It's not just what you hear. You got to think about what you don't hear. You didn't hear that I thought my mom was the devil and I had to kill her. You didn't hear, I can't go back to Mount Union, there's monsters there. If she makes me go back to Mount Union, I'll die. I need to kill her. It's what you didn't hear. None of the delusions that she reports, even if you believe that she's having delusions, can get past that wrongfulness hump. Because every one of those experts just say, well, she just She had a psychotic break. Well, she just had a psychotic break and she didn't know what she was doing. But nobody explains why those delusions would lead to murder. And as irrational as it might sound, the only reason you have based on the evidence is that she just couldn't have her mom talking to those administrators. Is it irrational? Yes. But it's not legal insanity. That's the evidence. And 3 experts, 30, or 300 is not going to change the evidence in this case. Thank you.